Chapter 19 of My Airships by Alberto Santos-Dumont. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Chapter 19. Speed. What speed my number 6 made on those Mediterranean flights was not published at the time because I had not sought to calculate it closely. Fresh from the troubling time limit of the Deutsch prize competition, I amused myself, frankly, with my airship, making observations of great value to myself, but not seeking to prove anything to anyone. The speed problem is, doubtless, the first of all airship problems. Speed must always be the final test between rival airships, and until high speed shall be arrived at, certain other problems of aerial navigation must remain in part unsolved. For example, take that of the airship's pitching, or tangage. I think it quite likely that a critical point in speed will be found beyond which, on each side, the pitching will be practically nil. When going slowly or at moderate speed, I have experienced no pitching, which in an airship like my number 6 seems always to commence at 25 to 30 kilometers or 15 to 18 miles per hour through the air. Now, probably when one passes this speed considerably, say at a rate of 50 kilometers or 30 miles per hour, all tangage or pitching will be found to cease again, as I myself experienced when flying homeward on the wind in the voyage last described. Speed must always be the final test between rival airships because, in itself, speed sums up all other airship qualities, including stability. At Monaco, however, I had no rivals to compete with. Furthermore, my prime study and amusement there was the beautiful working of the maritime guide rope, and this guide rope, dragging through the water, must of necessity retard whatever speed I made. There could be no help for it. Such was the price I must pay for automatic equilibrium and vertical stability, in a word, easy navigation, so long as I remained the sole and solitary navigator of the airship. Nor is it an easy task to calculate an airship's speed. On those flights up and down the Mediterranean coast, the speed of my return to Monaco, wonderfully aided by the wind, could bear no relation to the speed out, retarded by the wind, and there was nothing to show that the force of the wind going and coming was constant. It is true that on those flights one of the difficulties standing in the way of such speed calculations, the shoot the chutes montagne russe of ever-varying altitude, was done away with by the operation of the maritime guide rope. But, on the other hand, as has been said, the dragging of the guide rope's weight through the water acted as a very effectual brake. As the speed of the airship is increased, this brake-like action of the guide rope, like that of the resistance of the atmosphere itself, grows not in proportion to the speed, but in proportion to the square of it. On those flights along the Mediterranean coast, the easy navigation afforded me by the maritime guide rope was purchased, as nearly as I could calculate, by the sacrifice of about 7 or 8 kilometres, or 4 or 5 miles per hour of speed. But with or without maritime guide rope, the speed calculation has its own almost insurmountable difficulties. From Monte Carlo to Cap Martin at 10 o'clock of a given morning may be quite a different trip from Monte Carlo to Cap Martin at noon of the same day, while from Cap Martin to Monte Carlo, except in perfect calm, must always be a still different proposition. Nor can any accurate calculations be based on the markings of the anemometer, an instrument which I nevertheless carried. Out of simple curiosity I made note of its readings on several occasions during my trip of 12th February 1902. It seemed to be marking between 32 and 37 kilometers, or 20 and 23 miles per hour. But the wind, complicated by side gusts, acting at the same time on the airship and the wings of the anemometer windmill, i.e. on two moving systems whose inertia cannot possibly be compared, would alone be sufficient to falsify the result. When, therefore, I state that, according to my best judgment, the average of my speed through the air on those flights was between 30 and 35 kilometers, or 18 and 22 miles per hour, it will be understood that it refers to speed through the air, whether the air be still or moving, and to speed retarded by the dragging of the maritime guide rope. Putting this adverse influence at the moderate figure of 7 kilometers, or 4½ miles per hour, my speed through the still or moving air would be between 37 and 42 kilometers, or 22 and 27 miles per hour. Rather than spend time over illusory calculations on paper, I have always preferred to go on materially improving my airships. Later, when they come in competition with the rivals which no one awaits more ardently than myself, all speed calculations made on paper and all disputes based on them must of necessity yield to the one sublime test of airship racing. Where speed calculations have their real importance is in affording necessary data for the construction of new and more powerful airships. Thus, the balloon of my racing No. 7, whose motive power depends on two propellers, each 5 meters or 16½ feet in diameter, and worked by a 60 horsepower motor with a water cooler, has its envelope made of 2 layers of the strongest French silk, 4 times varnished, capable of standing under dynamometric test a traction of 3,000 kilograms, or 6,600 pounds for the linear meter, 3.3 feet. I will now try to explain why the balloon envelope must be made so very much stronger as the speed of the airship is designed to be increased, and in so doing I shall have to reveal the unique and paradoxical danger that besets high-speed dirigibles, threatening them not with beating their heads in against the outer atmosphere, but with blowing their tails out behind them. Although the interior pressure in the balloons of my airships is very considerable, as balloons go, the spherical balloon, having a hole in its bottom, is under no such pressure. It is so little in comparison with the general pressure of the atmosphere that we measure it not by atmospheres, but by centimeters or millimeters of water pressure, i.e. the pressure that will send a column of water up that distance in a tube. 1 atmosphere means 1 kilogram of pressure to the square centimeter, or 15 pounds to the square inch, and it is equivalent to about 10 meters of water pressure, or, more conveniently, 1,000 centimeters of water. Now, supposing the interior pressure in my slower number 6 to have been close up to 3 centimeters of water, it required that pressure to open its gas valves, it would have been equivalent to 1/333rd of an atmosphere. And as 1 atmosphere is equivalent to a pressure of 1,000 grams, or 1 kilogram on 1 square centimeter, the interior pressure of my number 6 would have been 1/333rd of 1,000 kilograms, or 3 grams. Therefore, on 1 square meter, 10,000 square centimeters, of the stem head of the balloon of my number 6, the interior pressure would have been 10,000 multiplied by 3, or 30,000 grams, i.e. 30 kilograms, or 66 pounds. How is this interior pressure maintained without being exceeded? Were the great exterior balloon filled with hydrogen and then sealed up with wax at each of its valves, the sun's heat might expand the hydrogen, make it exceed this pressure, and burst the balloon. Or, should the sealed balloon rise high, the decreasing pressure of the outer atmosphere might let its hydrogen expand with the same result. The gas valves of the great balloon, therefore, must not be sealed, and furthermore they must always be very carefully made so that they will open of their own accord at the required and calculated pressure. This pressure of 3 centimeters in the number 6, it ought to be noted, is attained by the heating of the sun or by a rise in altitude only when the balloon is completely filled with gas. What may be called its working pressure, about 1/5 lower, is maintained by the rotary air pump. Worked continually by the motor, it pumps air continually into the smaller interior balloon. As much of this air as is needed to preserve the outer balloon's rigidity remains inside the little interior balloon, but all the rest pushes its way out into the atmosphere again through its air valve, which opens at a little less pressure than do the gas valves. Let us now return to the balloon of my number 6. The interior pressure on each square meter of its stem head being continuously about 30 kilograms, the silk material composing it must be normally strong enough to stand it. Nevertheless, it will be easy to see how it becomes more and more relieved of that interior pressure as the airship gets in motion and increases speed. Its striking against the atmosphere makes a counter pressure against the outside of the stem head. Up to 30 kilograms to the square meter, therefore, all increase in the airship's speed tends to reduce strain, so that the faster the airship goes, the less it will be liable to burst out its head. How fast may the balloon be carried on by motor and propeller before its head stem strikes the atmosphere hard enough to more than neutralize the interior pressure? This, too, is a matter of calculation. But, to spare the reader, I will content myself with pointing out that my flights over the Mediterranean proved that the balloon of my "No. 6" could safely stand a speed of 36 to 42 kilometres, or 22 to 27 miles per hour, without giving the slightest hint of strain. Had I wanted an airship of the proportions of the "No. 6" to go twice as fast under the same conditions, its balloon must have been strong enough to stand 4 times its interior pressure of 3 centimetres of water, because the resistance of the atmosphere grows not in proportion to the speed, but in proportion to the square of the speed. The balloon of my "No. 7" is not, of course, built in the precise proportions of that of my "No. 6", but I may mention that it has been tested to resist an interior pressure of much more than 12 centimetres of water. In fact, its gas valves open at that pressure only. This means just 4 times the interior pressure of my "No. 6". Comparing the two balloons in a general way, it is obvious, therefore, that with no risk from outside pressure, and with positive relief from interior pressure on its stem or head, the balloon of my "No. 7" may be driven twice as fast as my easy-going Mediterranean pace of 42 kilometres, or 25 miles per hour, or 80 kilometres, or 50 miles. This brings us to the unique and paradoxical weakness of the fast-going dirigible. Up to the point where the exterior shall equal the interior pressure, we have seen how every increase of speed actually guarantees safety to the stem of the balloon. Unhappily, it does not remain true of the balloon's stern head. On it the interior pressure is also continuous, but speed cannot relieve it. On the contrary, the suction of the atmosphere behind the balloon, as it speeds on, increases also almost in the same proportion as the pressure caused by driving the balloon against the atmosphere, and this suction, instead of operating to neutralize the interior pressure on the balloon's stern head, increases the strain just that much, the pull being added to the push. Paradoxical as it may seem, therefore, the danger of the swift dirigible is to blow its tail out rather than its head in. See Figure 12. How is this danger to be met? Obviously by strengthening the stern part of the balloon envelope. We have seen that when the speed of my No. 7 shall be just great enough to completely neutralize the interior pressure on its stem head, the strain on its stern head will be practically doubled. For this reason I have doubled the balloon material at this point. I have reason to be careful of the balloon of my No. 7. In it the speed problem will be attacked definitely. It has 2 propellers, each 5 meters or 16½ feet in diameter. One will push as usual from the stern, while the other will pull from the stem, as in my No. 4. Its 60 horsepower Clement motor will, if my expectations are fulfilled, give it a speed of between 70 and 80 kilometers, or 40 and 50 miles per hour. In a word, the speed of my No. 7 will bring us very close to practical, everyday aerial navigation, for as we seldom have a wind blowing as much even as 50 kilometers, or 30 miles per hour, such an airship will surely be able to go out daily during more than 10 months in 12. End of chapter 19.